Chapter 99. Charged. The interrogation led nowhere, and I was formally charged with the murders. I was then taken to DC jail. This was my 4th time here. The first 3 times I was a juvenile. This would be my first time on the adult block. Ironically, DC jail felt like home sweet home. I was on the streets for less than a year, so coming back was easy. I was still psychologically incarcerated. I hadn't been free long enough for my mind to readjust to freedom, so being back in a cell wasn't torture, but rather a relief. I had already been in jail since I was 17. I was 23 now with almost 6 years served. All I needed was a single-man cell and some sleep. I was also happy that the feds never mentioned the Desert Eagle buried in the snow or the cash I hid in the house, which meant they never found it. But they were playing chess. Convicting me on the murders was virtually impossible, but they knew I had 16 years left on parole, and that was their trump card to keep me in prison. Even if I'm acquitted of the charges, the parole board could still hold me for up to 16 years. Plus, me being released back to society would create a lot of fear for their witnesses and confusion for their officers. My identical twin brother was going to be put on America's Most Wanted, the most popular crime show in America, so they would have to deal with the chaos of my release. To keep sane, I justified the unjustifiable, rationalized the irrational. Then I came to the implausible conclusion that I would never be free while my brother was. And I was cool with that. I just needed to get to the money that I had stashed. It could be used for lawyer fees and canteen, and also to assist in my escape, if need be. Chapter 100. Southwest 2. As I walked into Southwest 2's cell block at DC jail, it was like a college reunion. It seemed as if I knew everybody and everybody knew me. And it seemed as if we were all passing through these institutions like normal people passing through the school system. Kindergarten was the receiving home. Elementary was Seton Hall. Junior high was Oak Hill. High school was Lawton, and college was the feds. I was assigned to cell 4. This was a part of the journey and the lifestyle we lived, with the conversations amongst us all seeming to be limited to how to get money and eliminate rats. We were all back in this zoo because of a rat. We despised those cockroaches more than we despised snakes or pigs. Shit, even pigs despised rats. They had their own blue wall of silence. They broke the law more than we did. I remember dealing with the JumpOuts, who were usually gung-ho European cops who looked at the black neighborhoods as a hunting voyage. To them it was a safari. When they jumped out, you could hear their heavy breathing and see their strategic positioning as if they were on a National Geographic expedition. They saw themselves as the hunters and us as the prey. Some of the prey they feared and knew they had to be fully prepared to attempt a takedown, but most of the prey they didn't. One of them once pulled me to the side and asked, "Why don't you just apply to be a cop?" I was confused and felt disrespected until he explained, "We do the same thing y'all do. We hustle and tote weapons, but we do it legally. I have coke in my car right now." He laughed. Think about it. I didn't even waste my time. I was restless in Forest Hill because a lot of the unspent, pent-up energy that had to be released. 23 years old with a lifetime of experiences, struggle, and drama. I sharpened every piece of steel I could break off. I had knives stashed everywhere with at least 3 in my cell. I robbed anybody that came into the block that wore my size sneakers because I couldn't get any money sent in. The feds were monitoring my mail and phone calls because they were desperate to connect someone to Benny's act, and because they hadn't found my brother. I fought correctional officers. I smoked weed and drank wine every day. I sent word all over the jail looking for Earl E. Johnson, but he was not here. He was being held in Orange County Jail in Deep Virginia for his safety. But the guys from Virginia that were there were giving him hell. He was being shitted down and slapped around for snitching on the 100, the First and Kennedy Street bangers. After a while, an old-timer named Big Terry that was in my cell block came to me with a bag of crayons that he brought with him from Lawton. He had heard that I was an artist and loved to draw. He was in DC jail, which was a detention center, because his appeal of his life sentence was granted. He was back in court. He saw the path I was on and begged me to slow down. Life in prison or the death penalty was inevitable. He handed the bag of crayons to me and said, "Young, you could probably use these." Once he handed me the bag of crayons, I immediately calmed down. It was like he handed me my release papers. I had no paper, so I walked into my cell and began staring at the 4 white walls creatively. I stared at the crayons, then back to the walls hundreds of times. And by the time lockdown came that night, I had an idea. As the cells locked and the officers did their count, I grabbed a pencil and began sketching on the walls. I stayed up drawing until the breakfast trays came in. Writing and drawing on the walls were forbidden, but because it was the only thing that kept me out of trouble, the officers didn't bother me. I did a mural on all 4 of my cell walls that covered the whole cell from the floor to the ceiling. I drew coke and guns, triple beam scales and cars. I drew a masked man hanging out the window of a BMW, blasting a double-barrel sawed-off shotgun at a Toyota Cressida. And it brought the boring white wall cell to life. I used close-up toothpaste as the blood, because it was red, to make it look thick in 3D. I drew a beautiful naked girl laying by my bed that looked like my ex-girlfriend. I drew cops disrespecting people then getting shot at. I drew Ralph McLean. I drew Benny Lee. People were worried that the cops would take pictures of the cell and use it against me in court. But that was the last thing I was worried about being used against me. Plus, I didn't care. Drawing was my freedom. My friends would get high and then come into my cell and just stare at the walls for hours. The images looked like they were moving. Officers that worked in other cell blocks were coming to my cell just to look at the artwork. My ex-girlfriend's uncle knew I was back in jail because of all the news reports about our case, and he heard about the wall. He came to the cell block to check it out. "Man, how you end up back in here? I heard you reached out to my niece while you was out there." "Yeah, I did. Once. But I didn't call back because I could tell she wasn't feeling me, so I moved on." "What does that mean?" I heard it in her voice. "You mean the same voice that you hadn't heard in almost 5 years?" I looked in his eyes and had a realization that I may have made a bad decision to not pursue her because of my assumptions. I didn't hear any type of excitement in her voice when I called. She definitely wasn't happy to hear from me. "Well, she called me right after she spoke with you and she was excited. Then a couple weeks later she asked me to check if you were back in jail because she hadn't heard back from you." I dropped my head. My naturally aggressive stance humbled with the realization that I made a bad decision. "Man, you fucking up." I couldn't disagree with him at all. "I hope you're not here for too long because I believe she's still waiting for you to get your shit together. Look at this." He pointed to the wall. "Everybody in DC jail is talking about this wall. I've been hearing about it for the past 2 months. This is what you need to be doing out there, not the drugs and guns." He began staring at the wall and became hypnotized by the imagery. He then looked at the beautiful naked young lady laying by my bed and laughed. I know who that is. We laughed together. Get the hell out of here, Kareem. This life is for losers. It has no winners. Go home and get my niece. She's waiting for you. He shook my hand and walked out of the cell. I sat on the bunk and stared at the imagery of a man standing in the window of an apartment building, contemplating jumping out head first. Later that day, the deputy warden of the jail came to my cell to look at it. He had heard about it also. Young man, you are the talk of the jail. We all know about your case, Benny, your brother, but everyone is talking about your art. You have a talent. If you make it out of here, you need to cultivate that talent. Even though it was a violation of the jail rules, he never ordered the artwork to be removed. The cell eventually became infamous, not only because of the art, but also because of an altercation. A guy was robbed in his cell for his sneakers, canteen, and legal work by men wearing masks. Word was that he was an informant on a separate case. He was then told that the men who did it were in my cell, for sale. I was on the outside of the cell doing push-ups and reading his paperwork when he walked up asking if I knew something about him being robbed. That was extremely naive of him. Because of his disrespectful approach, I said, "Yeah, I do. Matter of fact, go right there in for sale. I'm going to tell you who did it." 2 of my soldiers were in there sharpening knives. He walked straight into the cell and I walked in right behind him. The punishing began almost immediately as he entered the cell. I wrapped a towel around his face to muffle the screams while he was being pummeled and gutted. He was punished so bad that he barely made it to the bubble, the officer's booth. I had to hurry and clean up the blood before the officers came, so I ripped the towel and wiped the floors, then tore off what was left of my t-shirt and wiped it again. The toilet's water pressure was so powerful that I could flush the cloths. It was also blood splattered all over the walls. I went to wipe it off and then paused. The 3D effect from the close-up toothpaste made it blend perfectly with the art. Oh shit, it actually makes it look better. I stared at it for a few seconds, then decided to leave it. A few minutes later, cops came running into the cell block looking for the perpetrators. The tough guy named names. The officers also went into my cell looking for evidence of an assault and ended up staring at the walls. They never realized that they were looking at the evidence. The blood on the wall was the victim's blood. He was now forever etched into my mural. Investigators took photos of the crime scene and only left with a beautiful picture.